At my son's grand wedding, I was made to sit alone at the back. His bride whispered coldly, "Your poverty will embarrass us." My heart sank until a man in a sharp suit walked up, sat beside me, and said softly, "Act like you're with me." The moment my son saw us together, his smile vanished and the entire hall fell silent. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice. Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. Hello, friends. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 58 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside Charleston, South Carolina. My home is small, but it's filled with the kind of peace you only find after years of struggle. I used to believe that hard work, love, and sacrifice always paid off in the end. But life has a strange way of proving us wrong. My story begins with my son, Ryan. Ryan, he was my whole world. After my husband died in a car accident, Ryan was just 9 years old. I raised him alone, working days at the library and nights cleaning offices just to keep food on the table. I never once complained. Every dollar I earned went to his schooling, his clothes, his future. He was a bright boy, kind, ambitious, always promising me, "Mom, one day I'll give you everything you deserve." I believed him. I believed every word. But as the years went by, Ryan grew into someone I barely recognized. Success changed him. But he got a big job in Atlanta, surrounded himself with people who dressed better, spoke smoother, and looked down on anyone who didn't fit their world. That's where he met Samantha, beautiful, elegant, but cold as marble. The first time she came to my home, I cooked her favorite dish. After asking Ryan, I even wore my best dress, hoping she'd feel welcome. But the moment she looked around my little house, I saw her eyes narrow. She smiled politely, but her smile never reached her eyes. That night, after they left, I sat in my kitchen and realized I didn't fit in his new life anymore. Months passed. Calls turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. When I'd ask when he'd visit, he'd say, "Soon, Mom, work's crazy." But I knew it wasn't the work keeping him away. It was shame. Shame of who I was, a simple woman with worn hands and a modest life. Then, one morning, a golden wedding invitation arrived in the mail. It was thick, perfumed, embossed with silver letters. Ryan Parker and Samantha Collins. The ceremony was at Magnolia Hall, one of Charleston's grandest venues. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the location. He was getting married here in the same city, and yet he never told me in person. Still, I wanted to believe that maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he wanted his mother there, quietly proud in the crowd. I took out my old beige dress, the one I'd worn to his college graduation, and pressed it neatly. My neighbor, kindly old Mrs. College graduation. "Evans, let me a soft yellow shawl. You'll look beautiful, Evelyn," she said. I smiled, even though my chest felt tight. When I arrived at Magnolia Hall, the place took my breath away. Chandeliers sparkled like stars, violins played softly, and every woman there wore diamonds. For a moment, I thought I'd walked into a movie. But as I stepped toward the front rows, a young woman, maybe one of Samantha's cousins, stopped me with a polite smile. "Sorry, ma'am, these seats are for close family only." I smiled back, a little confused. "I'm the groom's mother." Her face changed instantly. "Oh, right. Of course. I think your seat is in the back." The back. My hands trembled as I clutched my small purse and walked to the last row. I sat down, far away from the laughter and the lights, watching my son stand tall at the altar. He looked handsome, confident, like he belonged there more than I ever would. I wanted to feel proud. But all I felt was distance. When Samantha walked down the aisle, she was glowing, graceful, every eye on her. But when her gaze found me, I saw her lips tighten for half a second. After the bows, as people mingled, she came toward me, her perfume sharp, her voice sweet but slicing. She leaned close and whispered, "Your poverty will embarrass us. Please don't talk too much tonight." Her words burned. I looked down at my dress, at my hands, the same hands that once held Ryan through fever, through fear, through childhood. And I felt, then suddenly, I heard a familiar voice beside me. Mrs. Parker? I turned. A tall man in a sharp navy suit stood there, his eyes gentle, his presence calm. For a second, I couldn't place him. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" I asked. He smiled softly. "Michael Harris. We went to college together. You used to lend me your literature notes." My eyes widened. "Michael? It's been decades." He nodded, his gaze kind but knowing. "You haven't changed much," he said warmly. Then, lowering his voice, he whispered, "Act like you're with me." Before I could react, he pulled the chair beside me and sat down, confidently placing his hand over mine, protective, sure, like it belonged there. I froze, not out of fear, but shock. Around us, conversations began to quiet. Heads turned. I could feel the stares like heat on my skin. When I looked up, I saw Ryan at the front of the hall. He was staring right at me. His smile had vanished. Samantha, standing beside him, looked furious, whispering something into his ear. The music faltered for a second. People started murmuring. Michael leaned closer, his tone calm, steady. "Don't worry, Evelyn. Just sit tall. Let them wonder." And for the first time that evening, I smiled, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted attention, but because after years of being invisible, someone had seen me, really seen me. The next morning, I woke up to the soft hum of Charleston, waking up, distant church bells, the cry of seagulls over the harbor, and the smell of biscuits baking in the little shop down the street. I sat by the window with my cup of tea, staring at the sunlight falling on my worn hands. Ryan hadn't called since the wedding. Not even a simple, "Did you reach home safely, Mom?" That silence, it hurt more than any insult. It told me exactly where I stood in his world. I replayed that night over and over. Samantha's whisper, Ryan's look of embarrassment, and Michael's quiet strength beside me. I didn't know why he sat with me that night, but I knew one thing: it shifted something deep inside me. Later that day, I heard a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, there he was, Michael Harris, the same man from the wedding, holding a small bouquet of white tulips. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice calm yet full of warmth. I invited him in, still half in disbelief. "You saved me from the most humiliating moment of my life," I said softly. He smiled gently. "No, Evelyn, you didn't need saving. And you just needed someone to remind you of your worth." His words hit me like a slow wave. For years, I'd been shrinking myself to make Ryan comfortable, pretending his coldness was just busyness, his distance just maturity. But Michael's words, they brought something back to life in me. We sat for hours talking about the old college days, about how he built his business in Atlanta and how fate brought him to Charleston for that very wedding. "I didn't even know it was your son's wedding until I saw you," he said. My heart softened, but there was still shame buried deep. Shame for being looked down upon by my own child, for being seen as less because I didn't have money anymore. Michael must have sensed it because he leaned forward and said, we leaned forward and said, "Evelyn, money doesn't define class, dignity does. And you have that in abundance." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to the mirror and really looked at myself, the white streaks in my hair, the lines near my eyes, the sadness that had become my second skin. But beneath that, I saw something else too: resilience. I realized how much I'd given up just to please a son who didn't even see me as part of his world anymore. The next morning, I decided to visit Ryan. His house stood in one of those fancy Charleston neighborhoods, big iron gates, glass walls, and perfectly trimmed lawns. When I arrived, the maid looked at me like I didn't belong there. Mrs. Parker isn't expecting visitors, she said. I smiled softly. Tell her it's Ryan's mother. When Samantha appeared, her face dropped. Evelyn, this is unexpected. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes cold. I came to see my son, I said firmly. He's busy, she replied. Maybe another day? Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to stand at anyone's door like a beggar. Tell him his mother stopped by, I said, my tone calm but sharp enough to cut. As I turned to leave, I noticed a man near the gate, Michael, waiting by his car. He rolled down the window and said, "You look strong in there." I chuckled. I felt broken. He shook his head. No, Evelyn, that was the first step toward taking back your respect. That evening, he called me again. Come with me tomorrow, he said. I want to show you something. I hesitated, but something about his voice gave me comfort. The next day, he drove me to an old, beautiful house overlooking the sea. This used to belong to my aunt, he said. She wanted it turned into something meaningful, maybe a community cafe, maybe a small art center. I think it should carry your name. I stared at him, stunned. Michael, I don't understand. He smiled. You always believed in people. You deserve something that believes in you. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as someone's mother, not as someone's burden, but as a woman with her own story. As we stood there, the waves crashing below, a strange calm filled me. Maybe life wasn't done with me yet. Maybe, just maybe, my story was about to turn in a direction my son would never see coming. That night, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something big was changing inside me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was quiet strength. The next morning, Michael called again. Evelyn, I've been thinking, he said, what if we turn that old house into something beautiful together? Something with meaning. His words warmed me. His words warmed me. Together? I asked softly. Yes, he said, you and me. I'll handle the business part and you bring your warmth, your kindness. You've got something people trust. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd spent years being invisible, fading behind my son's ambitions, and now someone was seeing light in me again. I agreed to meet him that afternoon. When I reached the old seaside house, sunlight was pouring through the broken windows, touching the old wooden floors like golden threads. It was worn but full of soul, like me. We sat on the porch listening to the sea. Michael said we could call it Evelyn's place, a cafe where people feel home again. I smiled. You really think people would come? He looked at me steady and sure. They will, Evelyn, because this world is starving for real kindness. His faith in me felt almost unreal. And for years, Ryan had made me believe I was a burden, that my simple ways, my hand-sewn dresses, my secondhand shoes were a sign of failure. But now, for the first time, I started to feel like they were part of my story, not my shame. We spent days cleaning the place, painting the walls, scrubbing the floors, bringing in flowers, laughter, and hope. And slowly that abandoned house began to look alive again. A few weeks later, we opened the doors. The first day, only a few people came, some curious locals, a couple of old sailors, and a woman selling handmade candles. But by the end of the week, word had spread. People said the coffee tasted like comfort, that the air inside felt peaceful. Evelyn's place became a small miracle in Charleston. One evening, as I was wiping down the counter, I saw Ryan and Samantha walk in. My heart froze. Samantha's eyes scanned the place, that same polished arrogance still in her posture. Well, she said with a smirk, so this is where you spend your time now? Ryan looked uneasy. Mom, we didn't know you'd opened a cafe. I wiped my hands and looked at them. You wouldn't have cared either way, I said calmly. Samantha tilted her head. I just hope this um, place doesn't embarrass you again. Before I could reply, Michael walked out from the back room, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes steady. Evelyn, he said, the mayor's office just confirmed they want to feature your cafe in the Charleston Community Spotlight. The look on Samantha's face was priceless. She went pale, then forced a thin smile. That's wonderful, she murmured, clutching Ryan's arm. He looked between us, confused, like suddenly realizing the mother he'd dismissed had built something real, something respected. I could feel my heartbeat, steady, slow, powerful. I wasn't the woman sitting alone in the back of the wedding hall anymore. I was someone who'd found her place again, a place that didn't need his permission to exist. As they left, I felt Michael's hand gently touch my shoulder. You handled that with grace, he said. I smiled faintly. Grace, I repeated. That's what you get when you've already walked through fire. That night after closing, I stood outside looking at the sea. The wind felt lighter now, the world softer. I whispered to myself, maybe revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just living well enough that the people who doubted you can't ignore your light anymore. And deep inside, I knew my quiet revenge had just begun. The following morning, Charleston felt different. The air had that salty calm that comes after a long storm, like the city itself was breathing easier. I unlocked the cafe early, swept the floors, and stood by the window watching the sunrise paint the sea gold. Evelyn's place was slowly becoming more than a cafe. It was becoming a story. People came in not just for coffee, but for comfort. They'd sit for hours sharing pieces of their lives with me, laughing, sometimes crying. Every soul that walked in left a little softer. I didn't tell Ryan much about it. I didn't need his validation anymore. But word travels fast in Charleston, especially when the local paper runs a piece titled From Widow to Wonder, the woman who brought kindness back to the harbor. The article went viral locally, and soon people from nearby towns started visiting. Even tourists began stopping by. I'd see strangers taking photos in front of the sign, smiling. Sometimes they'd ask, "Are you the Evelyn?" And when I said yes, their eyes would light up like I was someone important. One day, while I was pouring coffee for a young couple, Michael walked in carrying a new signboard. It was hand-carved, elegant, and read, Evelyn's Place, Where Hearts Heal. I blinked back tears. Michael, it's beautiful. He smiled softly. You earned it, Evelyn. This isn't just a cafe anymore. It's your voice. Those words stayed with me. My voice, the one I'd buried for years behind Ryan's needs and Samantha's judgments, for the first time, it was heard again. That evening, as the sun went down, I received a message from Ryan. It was short and nervous. Mom, can we talk? I hesitated for a long moment before replying. If you want to talk, come to the cafe tomorrow. The next day, he came in wearing his usual designer suit, looking uncomfortable among the humble wooden chairs and the smell of cinnamon. Mom, he began, his voice uncertain. I didn't mean for things to go that way. Samantha, I cut him off gently. You don't have to explain, Ryan. I know who, but I also know who you've become. He looked down, ashamed. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. But you did, I whispered, not just that night. For years, you've treated me like I was less. You were so afraid of my simplicity that you forgot it was the only real thing you had. He looked lost, like a boy again. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You don't have to fix it, I said quietly. You just have to see me. There was silence for a long time. Then, unexpectedly, Michael walked in. He nodded politely at Ryan, then turned to me. Evelyn, the city council approved the grant, he said with a bright smile. We can open the community kitchen next month. Ryan looked surprised. Grant? Community kitchen, Michael explained. We're expanding Evelyn's place, serving free meals twice a week for anyone struggling in Charleston. My son's jaw tightened slightly. Mom, I didn't realize it was this big. I smiled. You never asked. He stood there, speechless, while Michael and I talked about permits and plans. For once, Ryan wasn't the center of the conversation. I was. When he finally left, he looked back at me from the door, and for the first time in years, I saw something like respect in his eyes. Later that night, when I closed the cafe, I sat alone with my tea. The moonlight fell across the tables, and I realized something. Revenge wasn't about making him feel small, was about becoming whole again. Still, a quiet thought lingered. Samantha wouldn't take this change lightly. She was too proud, too controlling, and I could already feel her next move coming. But this time, I was ready for her. A few days later, the calm began to shift. I could sense it even before it happened, that uneasy silence before a storm. Samantha had always been the kind of woman who couldn't stand being outshined. One, especially not by the woman she once called embarrassment, when she appeared at the cafe one sunny afternoon, dressed in her designer beige coat and diamond earrings. I knew something was brewing. She didn't order coffee, didn't even smile. She just stood there by the counter pretending to look around while her eyes scanned every inch of the place. So she finally said, her voice coated in sugar, "This is Evelyn's place." Quite charming. I looked at her calmly. "Thank you. We've worked hard to make it warm." Her lips curved into a smirk. "Warm, yes. But do you have any idea how this looks, Evelyn? People are talking. They think you've become some sort of celebrity." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that a bad thing?" Her eyes flashed with quiet irritation. "It's just people might get the wrong idea. Ryan's colleagues are starting to ask questions. They think you're being dramatic for attention." I wiped my hands on my apron and met her gaze. I didn't know kindness and work counted as drama. Her expression stiffened. "You've always had a way with words," she said. "But just remember, this little fairy tale of yours doesn't last forever." Before I could reply, Michael came out from the back, holding a tray of fresh muffins. "Samantha," he greeted politely, "would you like to try one? They're made with local honey." She froze, clearly not expecting him. "No, thank you," she said quickly. I was just leaving. After she left, I felt the tension leave the room, like a heavy cloud drifting away. Michael sighed. "She's trying to rattle you." I nodded slowly, and she almost did. He smiled softly. "Don't let her. You've already won, Evelyn. She just doesn't know it yet." That night, I sat in my little apartment upstairs, staring at the newspaper again. The headline still shining, "Evelyn's place brings light to Charleston's hearts." But I wasn't smiling because I knew Samantha wouldn't stop at words. She had connections, money, and a heart that only cared about appearances. I had seen that kind of cruelty before, quiet, sophisticated, and poisonous moves. The next morning, my fears came true. A city inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, saying there had been anonymous complaints about zoning violations. I stood there, stunned, as he explained we'd have to shut down temporarily while they reviewed our permits. Michael arrived midway through the conversation, his jaw tightening as he heard the details. After the inspector left, I looked at him helplessly. "She did this, didn't she?" He nodded slowly. "Most likely, but we'll fight it." I took a deep breath, my hands trembling. "I don't want to fight, Michael. I just want peace." He stepped closer, his eyes gentle but firm. Sometimes peace has to be earned by standing up once. That night, we stayed late, gathering documents, writing statements, calling lawyers. I didn't have much money, but Michael insisted he'd handle it. You focus on keeping your spirit alive, he said softly. That's what built this place. The following days were hard. The cafe was closed, the chairs empty, the laughter gone. I'd walk past the windows and see only my reflection, tired, determined, and wounded. People started asking what happened, offering prayers and support. Don't give up, Miss Evelyn, one little girl said, pressing a small handmade card into my hand. It had a drawing of a coffee cup and a heart. That moment broke something inside me, not my will, but the last bit of self-doubt I'd been carrying. I decided I wouldn't let Samantha win. She could have her money, her power, her lies, but I had something she'd never understand: people's faith. A week later, I organized a small event outside the cafe, just me, a table, a pot of coffee, and free muffins. No permits, no grand opening, just connection. People came, they brought chairs, stories, and warm. By sunset, the street was full. The local reporter showed up again, filming the crowd, calling it Charleston's quiet protest for kindness. And as I stood there watching strangers lift each other, I realized Samantha hadn't silenced me. She'd given me a louder voice, one that didn't need her approval, one that would soon shake the very ground she stood on. The next few days felt like a battle between light and shadow. Charleston streets buzzed with talk about the cafe's closure, and while Samantha's circle whispered their cold little stories, the people of the town whispered something else: hope. Every morning, someone would leave flowers or a small note outside my door. We miss your coffee. Don't give up, Evelyn. This town needs your heart. Those words kept me standing. Michael was working nonstop with the lawyer, trying to get the permits cleared, but we both knew this wasn't about paperwork. It was about pride. Samantha wanted me buried quietly, humiliated again, just like that day at the wedding. But this time, she had no idea who she was up against. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun dip behind the Charleston harbor, my phone was Ryan. His voice was tight, almost nervous. Mom, can we meet tomorrow? He asked. Samantha's been upset lately. I think it's about the cafe. I smiled faintly. Upset? She's the one who sent the inspector, Ryan. He was silent for a long moment. You don't know that, he said finally. I sighed. I know your wife's son. I know how she operates. She smiles when she wins, and she's been smiling a lot lately. He didn't reply, just said, let's talk tomorrow. The next afternoon, he met me at the cafe steps. He looked tired, maybe even guilty. Mom, he said quietly, Samantha may have overreacted. She said she was trying to protect our family's image. People talk. And I stopped him right there. Ryan, I am your family. You don't protect me by silencing me. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. She didn't mean to hurt you. She just doesn't understand you like I do. I felt my heart ache. Then help her understand, Ryan, because if she keeps coming for me, she'll lose more than just my respect. His head snapped up. Are you threatening her? No, I said calmly. I'm warning her. Before he could respond, Michael's car pulled up. He stepped out with papers in his hand and a tired but proud smile. Evelyn, he said, they've lifted the closure. The cafe can reopen next week. I felt tears sting my eyes.
Ryan looked in between us, confused, as Michael handed me the approval document. How did you manage that?
I asked, my voice trembling. You'd be surprised what happens when good people rally together, Michael said softly. Half the town signed a petition. Even the mayor's wife came by with her signature. Ryan's face shifted, shame flickering across his features. I didn't realize people cared that much. I looked at him steady and calm. They care because I cared for them first. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then he said, I'll tell Samantha to leave this alone. I gave a small, tired smile. Do that, son, because this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about respect, something your wife never learned. He nodded, looking small against the afternoon light, and walked away. As soon as he disappeared down the street, Michael turned to me. You okay? I exhaled, the tension easing from my chest. I think so, I said. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Samantha doesn't take defeat easily. Michael smiled softly. Then she's about to learn how strong grace can be. That night, as I walked through the empty cafe, I touched the walls, the tables, the little plants by the window. They all felt alive again, like they'd been waiting for this moment of rebirth. I whispered quietly to myself, you did it, Evelyn. But deep inside, I knew something was still coming, something that would test not just my strength, but my forgiveness too. And when it came, I promised myself I wouldn't break this time, not for anyone, not even for family. The reopening day of Evelyn's place arrived with a golden sunrise spilling across the Charleston harbor. The morning breeze carried the smell of sea salt and magnolias, and my heart thumped with a mix of nerves and joy. After weeks of fighting, cleaning, and holding on to faith, the cafe doors finally opened again. I stood there in my soft yellow dress, the same color I'd worn on the first day we opened, and whispered a small prayer under my breath. Let today be gentle. Within an hour, the place was full again. Familiar faces, laughter, the sound of spoons clinking against cups. It was music to my soul. People hugged me, congratulated me. Some even cried. It felt like the town itself had wrapped me in its arms. Michael moved around, helping the staff, his smile never fading. When I looked at him, I realized how much she'd been my anchor through all of this. Quiet strength, no expectations, just faith. Around noon, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. And that's when I saw her, Samantha, standing across the street beside her black SUV, sunglasses on, watching. Even from that distance, I could feel the chill in her eyes. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, observing the crowd inside Evelyn's place. For a moment, our eyes met. Her expression didn't change, but I could tell she was calculating something. I turned and walked back inside. I wasn't going to let her ruin this day. By evening, the cafe was glowing with soft lights and music. A local musician played guitar in the corner, and the sound of waves outside blended perfectly with the hum of conversation. I was talking to a reporter when Ryan walked in. He looked different that night. No arrogance, no rush, just quiet eyes. Hey, Mom, he said, giving me a soft smile. Can I sit? I nodded, a cautious warmth spreading through me. Of course, Ryan. He looked around, taking in the cozy chaos, people laughing, couples holding hands, kids running to the counter for cookies. You did all this, he said, almost in awe. I underestimated you. I smiled gently. Most people do until they see what a broken heart can build. He chuckled softly, then leaned closer. Samantha's angry, he admitted. She feels like everyone's turning against her. She says, you're manipulating people's sympathy. I took a slow breath, holding back the pain that stirred inside me. I'm not manipulating anyone, Ryan. I just showed kindness when she showed cruelty. If people choose to see that difference, that's not on me. He nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I know, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. My throat tightened. I'd waited years to hear those words, but now that they came, they didn't erase the scars. Still, I reached out, touched his hand, and said, you're my son, Ryan. You don't need to apologize to love me, but you do need to mean it when you say you will. His eyes watered, and for a brief moment, I saw the little boy he once was, the one who used to run into my arms after school, covered in mud, laughing. I'll make things right, he said quietly. After he left, I went out back to breathe, feeling the cool night air against my skin. That's when Michael found me holding 2 cups of hot cocoa, peace offering, he said with a grin. I laughed softly, taking one. You read my mind. We sat in silence for a while, watching the waves shimmer under the moonlight. Then he said something that made my heart skip. Evelyn, have you ever thought about what comes next? After all this, I turned to him. You've built something powerful here. You've healed people. But what about you? What heals you? I didn't answer right away. I just looked out at the ocean, the reflection of the moon trembling on the water. Maybe this, I whispered. Maybe knowing I didn't let the world turn me bitter. Michael smiled softly. That's what I've always admired about you. His words lingered, heavy and kind. For a long moment, we just sat there, 2 souls who'd seen too much loss but still believed in grace. And yet, even in that piece, I couldn't shake the feeling that Samantha wasn't done. The look in her eyes that afternoon still burned in the back of my mind. I didn't know how, but I sensed she'd strike again. And next time it wouldn't just be with inspectors or rumors, it would be personal. But what she didn't know was this: I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd already risen from worse. And this time, when she came for me, I'd be ready not to fight her, but to teach her exactly what dignity looks like when it's pushed too far. The next morning felt unusually quiet, like the world was holding its breath before something changed forever. The wedding chaos had ended, but the echoes still lingered in the air. The whispers, the glares, the shame my son had tried to bury me under. Yet deep inside, I wasn't broken anymore. I felt something new rising in me, a strange calm mixed with purpose. I walked into my small kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and looked out the window. The soft Charleston sun touched the magnolia trees in my backyard, and I whispered to myself, it's time. That afternoon, I called my old friend, Michael Harris, the man who stood by me last night when everyone else turned away. His voice was warm, familiar, like a safe place I'd forgotten existed. Evelyn, he said, I didn't sleep much after last night. You've been through too much. I sighed softly. Michael, I've been through years of silence, but now I think it's time I make some noise. He chuckled. I like the sound of that. What are you planning? Something simple, I said, smiling faintly. A reminder to my son that respect isn't a gift, it's earned. That same week, I met with my old lawyer, Mr. Clay, a kind man with a sharp mind, who once helped my late husband with property deals. I sat across from him and placed a stack of papers on his desk. He looked over them, raised a brow, and said, you really want to transfer the ownership of your land, the farmhouse, and the cafe to your name alone? It's still under Ryan's joint title. I nodded. Yes, I signed it over years ago when I thought he'd take care of me. But that was my mistake. I want my independence back. Mr. Clay smiled with quiet pride. You're stronger than most people I've met, Evelyn. We'll make sure everything is legally sealed and protected. 2 weeks later, the documents were finalized. For the first time in years, my name stood alone on those property papers. I felt light, almost free. Ryan had no idea. I wanted it that way. Meanwhile, Michael and I started seeing each other more often. We'd go for long evening walks by the waterfront. We'd go for long evening walks or sit on my porch with lemonade, talking about life and regrets and second chances. There was no rush between us, just peace. One evening, he looked at me and said, Evelyn, you've got a quiet fire in you. I can see it. You were yet here you are, stronger. I smiled softly, staring at the horizon. Maybe it's not strength, Michael. Maybe it's just survival. He reached out and took my hand. No, it's more than that. You're rebuilding what they tried to destroy. His words sank deep, and for the first time in years, I let someone see the real me, the woman behind the sorrow. behind the mother who kept giving without being seen. A few days later, I received an invitation to Ryan's new restaurant opening. The card was elegant. To my beloved mother, it said. I almost laughed. The same man who once made me sit at the back now wanted me at his grand opening. But instead of anger, I felt something else, Strattage. I called Michael that night. Do you have a black dress suit? I asked. Why? He teased. Because I think it's time you sit beside me again, I said. He paused, then said quietly, You sure about this? Very sure. On the night of the opening, I dressed carefully. A simple navy dress, pearl earrings, and my hair pulled neatly back. Michael arrived in his dark suit, and when he saw me, his eyes softened. You look radiant, he said. I feel ready, I replied. As we entered the restaurant, all eyes turned toward us, especially Ryan and Samantha. Our fake smile froze midair. Ryan's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the tablecloth. The music dimmed slightly as we approached their table. Mom, Ryan said, forcing a grin. I didn't know you were coming. You invited me, I replied calmly. And I never decline family invitations anymore. Samantha's lips tightened. How nice of you to bring company. Michael extended his hand politely. Pleasure to see you both again. Ryan's eyes flickered with discomfort as if he was replaying the humiliation from the wedding night. But this time I didn't shrink. I smiled, confident and unbothered. We sat down at a corner table, ordered quietly, and enjoyed our meal. Every few minutes, I could feel Samantha's gaze on me, sharp and cold. I leaned slightly toward Michael and said under my breath, You can feel it, can't you? He smiled. Oh, I can feel every ounce of it. By the end of the night, whispers had spread again, this time not about my poverty or shame, but about my grace, my poise, and the mysterious man by my side. As we left the restaurant, Michael said softly, You just stole the night, Evelyn. I looked back at the glowing sign of my son's restaurant and whispered, No, I just took back my place in the story. The following morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The Charleston air carried that faint ocean smell mixed with magnolia bloom, soft but strong, like a memory that refuses to fade. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching the world wake up, and thought about last night, the looks on Ryan and Samantha's faces, the whispers, the tension that lingered in the air like perfume. It wasn't revenge that comforted me. It was something deeper, a quiet reclaiming of self-respect. For so long, I let them define my worth by their standards, by their lifestyle, by the way I fit or didn't fit into their worlds. But last night reminded me of something I had forgotten. I didn't need anyone's approval to hold my head high. A week passed and I busied myself with the cafe again. Business had picked up since Michael helped me modernize the place. He'd suggested adding a small reading corner and live acoustic nights on Fridays. You're not just selling coffee, Evelyn, he said one day, sketching out a new layout. You're creating a home for people who've lost theirs. I smiled because deep down, I knew he was right. That little cafe had become my refuge after losing everything. My husband, my dignity, even my son's love. Now it was turning into something beautiful, something mine. Around that time, Ryan came by unexpectedly. I saw his car pull up through the front window, and for a moment, I froze. He hadn't visited me in months, not since the wedding. He walked in wearing a crisp white shirt and that fake charm he always wore when he needed something. Mom, he said softly, you look great. The place looks nice. I didn't get up. Thank you, Ryan. Coffee? Sure, he said, sitting down. I poured him a cup and placed it in front of him, noticing the way his fingers tapped nervously against the table. What's on your mind? I asked. He cleared his throat. I heard from someone that you've been seeing that man. What's his name? Michael. I looked at him calmly. Yes, that's right. He frowned. Mom, people talk. They think you're moving too fast, moving too fast, or maybe making decisions that aren't wise. I chuckled quietly. Ryan, those people you're talking about are probably the same ones who called me poor at your wedding. His face turned red. That was Samantha's fault, not mine. But you didn't stop her? I replied softly. Silence hung between us. Finally, he leaned forward. Look, I didn't come here to argue. I came because I want to buy your cafe. My heart sank for a second, not from fear, but from disbelief. Buy my cafe? Why? Because he said quickly, you're getting older, Mom. You should rest. Let me take over. I'll manage it properly. Maybe even expand it. You'll get a good amount for it. I leaned back and smiled faintly. Ryan, this cafe isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a smirk. Mom, don't make this emotional. I'm trying to help. No, Ryan, I said firmly. You're trying to control his expression. Hardened. Fine, but don't say I didn't offer. He stood up and stormed out, the little bell above the cafe door jingling harshly behind him. I sat there quietly for a while, staring at his empty chair. The same boy I'd once carried in my arms now looked at me as if I were just a piece on his chessboard. When Michael arrived later that evening, he noticed the look on my face. He was here, wasn't he? He asked. I nodded. He wants to buy the cafe. Of course he does, Michael said, setting down a bag of pastries. It's not just about business, Evelyn. It's about power. I sighed. He doesn't understand. This cafe isn't just walls and tables. It's my independence. Michael leaned closer, his voice calm but steady. Then you protect it. Don't let anyone rewrite your story. His words lingered in my mind long after he left. That night, I sat alone under the dim cafe lights, tracing my fingers across the wooden counter my husband once built. For years, I'd been quiet, forgiving, and patient, a mother who waited for her son to love her again. But that woman was gone now. In her place stood someone new, someone who had finally learned that revenge doesn't always come in loud, angry gestures. Sometimes it's the simple act of standing tall when they expect you to bow. And as I turned off the lights and locked the cafe door, I whispered to myself, this is my peace, and no one is taking it away from me again. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The glow from the streetlights spilled through the thin curtains, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of Charleston outside. My heart was still heavy from the wedding, from the looks, from the silence that cut deeper than words ever could. I tried to tell myself I didn't care, that my son's choices were his own, but a mother's heart doesn't work that way. It keeps loving even through hurt. The next morning, I got up early, made coffee, and stood by the window watching people pass by. Then I heard a knock. It was the same man from the wedding standing on my porch, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. He smiled softly and said, you looked like you could use a friend that night. His voice was calm, warm, and for a moment, I forgot how lonely I'd felt. His name was Thomas. We sat outside on the porch, sipping coffee as the city slowly woke up. He told me he was an old friend of my late husband, someone who had worked with him years ago before life pulled them apart. As he spoke, I felt a strange peace, the kind that comes when someone looks at you and truly sees you. days turned into weeks, and Thomas started visiting more often, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing but stories, sometimes with nothing, but we'd talk about small things, music, the weather, the way the ocean smelled at dawn. But beneath it all, I could feel his quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to be proven. One afternoon, as we sat by the harbor, I told him about my son, how he drifted away, how the wedding felt like a goodbye I never wanted. Thomas listened without judgment. He simply reached over and said, maybe it's time he learns what he lost. His words lingered in the air. I didn't know what he meant then, but something in his tone made me think he had a plan. A week later, an envelope arrived at my door. Inside was an invitation to a charity event hosted by Daniel's company. People think about the same son who couldn't bear to have me near him in public. I almost tore it up, but Thomas stopped me. Come with me, he said this time. Don't hide who you are. That evening, I stood before the mirror wearing a soft navy dress Thomas had bought me. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. When we entered the hall, every head turned. My son froze mid-sentence, his eyes locked on me, disbelief written across his face. His wife's smile faltered, and I saw fear flicker behind her perfect expression. I didn't say a word. I just stood tall beside Thomas, who held my hand gently but firmly. For once, I didn't feel small or ashamed. I felt seen, respected, and unafraid. The whispers started almost instantly, and I could see Daniel's pride crumble under the weight of truth. He knew he had pushed me away, but now everyone saw the woman he had tried to hide. That night was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I walked out of that hall with my head high and my heart light, leaving my son to face the reflection of his own choices. The morning after that charity event felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, the kind that follows after a storm finally breaks. For the first time in so long, I woke up without that heavy ache sitting on my chest. The house was quiet, filled only with the sound of the clock ticking and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, the same window I'd sat by every morning for years, watching the world move while I stood still. But that morning felt like the beginning of something new. The sunlight poured through the glass, soft and golden, painting my living room in warmth. I thought about last night, the way every face in that grand hall had turned toward me, the look on Daniel's face when he saw me standing tall beside Thomas. For years, I'd imagined moments of revenge, of finally being seen. But what happened wasn't about revenge at all. It was about dignity, about finally seeing myself as someone worth respect. I sipped my coffee slowly and smiled for no reason at all. Then my phone buzzed. The sound startled me because I wasn't expecting anyone. I glanced at the screen and froze when I saw the name Daniel. Daniel, my son. The same boy who hadn't called me in months, the same man who had turned away from me in shame. The message was short. Can we talk, Mom? Just 5 words, but they carried more weight than any speech she could have given. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. I didn't reply right away. I walked around the room for a while, my mind caught between the pain of the past and the hope of something new. Finally, I sat back down and typed, "Do you know where to find me?" It was nearly noon when I heard the soft rumble of a car pulling into my driveway. I stood at the door, my heart racing, and when I opened it, there he was, my son. Right? He looked nothing like the proud groom I'd seen at that wedding. His face was pale, his eyes tired, and there was a heaviness in his shoulders that told me life had been teaching him lessons the hard way. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. He just stood there, his eyes searching mine, and finally said, "I didn't recognize the woman I saw last night. I felt my throat tighten, but I managed a small smile. Maybe what you finally saw me for who I am. He took a slow breath, his voice shaking slightly as he said, I was wrong, Mom. I was so obsessed with fitting in, with being respected by people who didn't care about me. I thought having money, having status would protect me from shame, but all it did was make me forget who I really was. He stopped and looked away, his jaw clenched. I forgot you. I forgot everything you taught me. His words cracked something deep inside me. All those nights I cried alone, wondering what I'd done wrong, came rushing back. But as I watched him standing there, I didn't see arrogance anymore. I saw regret, and I saw my boy, the same boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to draw me messy little cards that said, I love you, Mom. We sat down in the living room. He looked around quietly, noticing the framed photos he hadn't seen in years. I could see guilt flicker in his eyes when he saw the one from his college graduation, me smiling proudly, holding his arm, unaware of how soon the distance between us would grow. She's not what I thought she was, he said suddenly. I didn't need to ask who he meant. His wife, he rubbed his hands together and continued, she doesn't care about people, only about appearances. When she saw you last night, she panicked. She didn't want people to know where I came from. But when I saw you standing there with that man, confident, unshaken, I realized I'd been the fool all along. I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence says more than words. He looked at me, his eyes wet. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm sorry. That's when the tears came, his first, then mine. I reached across and took his hand. You're my son, Daniel. That doesn't change just because you lost your way. He broke down, really broke down, the way grown men only do when they've hit the truth. We sat like that for a long time, not mother and son divided by pride, but two souls finally meeting again after years of distance. By the time the sun began to set, the light turned golden again, just like the morning. Before leaving, Daniel hugged me tightly, not the quick, polite kind of hug people give when they're pretending everything's fine. This one was raw and trembling, filled with all the things he couldn't say. I'll call you tomorrow, he whispered, and I believed him this time. When the door closed, I stood there for a while, holding my chest, feeling that strange mix of sorrow and peace. Later that night, I called Thomas. He picked up on the second ring, his voice soft as ever. I knew he'd come, he said. I told him everything, how Daniel apologized, how he seemed like that little boy again. Thomas just chuckled gently and said, see, you didn't have to fight anyone. You just had to remember who you are. His words sank deep into me. I realized then that real revenge isn't about making someone hurt. It's about healing yourself so deeply that their opinion no longer has power over you. After hanging up, I stepped outside. The street was quiet, the air cool and soft. I looked up at the sky and whispered a quiet thank you to God, to life, to every hurt that had shaped me. I wasn't the same woman who sat alone at that wedding, feeling invisible. I was someone stronger, someone who had faced humiliation and found grace instead. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's silent, steady, and kind. It's choosing to live well when the world expects you to break. And that night, as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt a calm smile spread across my face. My story wasn't over yet, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of how it would end. The days that followed felt like the world had slowed down in the best possible way. The air carried a softness I hadn't felt in years. Every morning I'd make my coffee, sit on that same porch, and watch the neighborhood come alive. children running to school, old couples walking their dogs, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the little bakery down the street. Life felt simple again, but in that simplicity, I found something powerful. Peace. Daniel started calling me more often. Sometimes it was a quick check in. Sometimes he'd stay on the phone for an hour just talking about work or how he was trying to fix the things he'd broken. I never asked about his wife, and he never offered much, but I could hear in his voice that the illusion he once chased had finally cracked. He was beginning to see life through clearer eyes. One Sunday afternoon, he came over with a small box in his hands. "This is for you," he said softly, placing it on the table. When I opened it, I found an old photograph, the three of us from years ago, standing outside the tiny house we once called home. My hair was darker then. His father stood tall beside us, and Daniel was just a little boy with a missing front tooth, laughing like he owned the sunshine. Behind the photo was a small note in Daniel's handwriting. I remember now. That was all it said. But it was enough to bring tears to my eyes. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always come with big words. Sometimes it's just a moment, quiet, pure, and enough to heal what pride once broke. A few weeks later, Daniel told me his marriage had ended. There was sadness in his voice, but also relief. "She never loved me for me," he said, "but maybe I needed to lose everything to remember what matters." I didn't judge him. Life teaches lessons in its own way, and sometimes it takes losing everything to see what truly matters. Thomas stayed close through it all. He never pushed, never demanded, just stood by me like a calm anchor. Some evenings we'd sit by the harbor, watching the light fade over the water. He'd tell me stories about his travels, about how people search the world for meaning when sometimes it's right in front of them. He said something that stuck with me that night. "You don't heal by pretending the past never happened. You heal by letting it teach you who you are." I carried those words with me. One evening, Daniel invited me to dinner at his new apartment. It was small, quiet, and filled with plants he probably didn't know how to care for yet. But it felt warm, real. He cooked spaghetti, a little overcooked, but it made me smile because it was his first time trying. We ate together, and between bites, he said, "Mom, I want to do things differently now. I want to make you proud." I looked at him and said, "You already have. You came back. That was all I ever needed." After dinner, I walked back home through the quiet Charleston streets, the moonlight spilling across the cobblestones. My steps were slow, not from age, but from gratitude. I thought about everything, the pain, the humiliation, the long years of silence, and how somehow it had all led me here. Life doesn't give back what you lose, but it gives you something better, wisdom. I had spent so long believing revenge was about making someone suffer, but I had learned that true revenge was living in peace when they expected you to live in pain. Thomas met me at the porch that night. He looked at me and smiled. "You look lighter," he said. I laughed softly. Maybe I finally let go. We sat there for a while, listening to the cicadas and the distant waves. I looked at him and said, "If that wedding never happened, I might never have met you." He nodded. Life has a way of leading us exactly where we need to be, even if it breaks us on the way there. I took his hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. That night before going to bed, I stood by the mirror and really looked at myself, the wrinkles, the gray hair, the lines that told stories no one else could see. For the first time, I didn't see a woman left behind or forgotten. I saw a survivor, a mother who gave everything, lost everything, and still found a reason to smile. I whispered quietly to my reflection, "You did good." As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I felt peace settle over me like a soft blanket. Outside, the night was calm, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. Life was moving forward gently, steadily, and I was ready to move with it. So, my dear friends, that was my story, a story of pain, pride, forgiveness, and finding strength in the quiet places of your heart. Life doesn't always give us the endings we dream of, but sometimes it gives us something even better. Peace. If my story touched your heart, don't forget to share it in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and if you've ever had to find strength when no one believed in you. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because I promise the next one will touch your heart even deeper. Until then, take care of your heart, hold your head high, and remember, sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well